it's this deficiency that leads to some of the most common ailments that we suffer from. Mental illness, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar, sleep disorders, very severe gut issues. I mean, there are so many that don't seem to be fixable with conventional therapies or dietary changes, because very often disease is not happening to us, it's happening within us. And I'm not going to stop getting the message out to the masses. There were 8,819 participants in this meta-analysis, so a very large analysis. And they found a direct inverse relationship between sodium intake and migraine headaches. And meaning that as sodium levels went up, migraine headaches went down. Now, by no means am I telling everybody that has a migraine headache that you need to take a little bit of salt and you're going to be fine. What I'm saying is on your comprehensive metabolic panel, you can see your sodium level. When your sodium level gets to a critically low level, which, believe it or not, quite a few people have, people that regularly sauna, people that exercise and don't remineralize with electrolytes, people that drink filtered bottled water in an effort to filter out fluoride and microplastics, but don't remineralize their water, get nutrient deficient sodium. And, you know, remembering that the brain actually doesn't have any pain receptors, but the covering of the brain does. You know, something called the dura. And the dura hates two things. It hates being stretched and it hates being contracted. And what determines whether or not it's stretching or contracting is something called the osmotic gradient, the movement of water across the membrane. And yes, it can be as simple as supplementing with sodium. My preference would be Baja Gold sea salt or Celtic Salt, so that you get all of the other trace minerals as well, to permanently put migraine headaches into remission. And then, you know, out come all of the physicians saying there's no evidence of that. Well, there are clinical trials on that. And the other tool that I have in my chest is for 20 years, I worked with one of the largest databases in the world. And we're at the point now where we see 20,000 new gene tests a month. I don't know many clinics that are that busy. So we have voluminous amounts of data. We see what happens when you have high homocysteine and you put a patient on an amino acid called trimethylglycine, and the homocysteine comes down, and then they go to their doctor and their blood pressure is normalized. Not once, not twice, not anecdotally, thousands and thousands of times. You see what happens to people when you bring their hemoglobin A1C and their insulin back down into the optimal level and their triglycerides return to normal and their risk for cardiovascular disease declines. You see what happens to C-reactive proteins when people take simple things like silica clays and activated charcoals. And so I want to keep getting the message out that very often disease is not happening to us, it's happening within us. And very often it's happening because of deficiencies in the human body, not pathology in the human body. And, you know, in the United States, we're by far the largest spender on healthcare. You know, we spend $4.5 trillion a year on healthcare in the US. We have the highest infant mortality rate. We have the highest maternal mortality rate. Even though we lead the world in flu vaccinations and and breast cancer screening and colorectal screening, we also lead the world in cancer. We're ranked 52nd in life expectancy. We're ranked 39th in healthcare delivery. We're one of the most obese nations on the planet, twice the rate of obesity of any other civilized nation. And yet modern medicine being, you know, medical error being the third leading cause of death is where we're going to get information on how we extend our life. And I watched in medical records, I've probably read thousands of times more medical records than most physicians because I read medical records all day, every day, 6 days a week for almost 20 years. And I would see what would happen when simple deficiencies would be mistaken as a pathological condition. And I've talked about these a lot. Like clinical deficiencies in vitamin D3 for prolonged periods of time eventually present as rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms. People get joint aches and pains and stiff and sore ankles, and they have a hard time making a fist. And you know, when you're speaking to the wrong physician, very often a doctor will diagnose you based on your medical history. Not before they do SED rates and rheumatoid arthritis, you know, actual blood checks. They'll say, you know what, Stephen, you've got rheumatoid arthritis, and they put you on things like corticosteroids. And in the mortality space, we had data, So we had data on all of these pharmaceuticals. So we knew the trajectory of hormones and cell walls and cell membranes and production of vitamin D3 when somebody took a statin and reduced cholesterol. And we looked at, the studies will look at cholesterol in a complete vacuum. So LDL cholesterol high, so that's bad. Let's bring LDL cholesterol down with a statin so we decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease. But then you have a concomitant outcome where you're reducing the ability for the body to make hormones and cell walls and cell membranes. And so you buy yourself a consequence downstream. When really, if we go back to just studying the physiology of the human body, when we, in the mortality space, I don't think I saw a single centenarian once, and we processed hundreds of these death claims. I don't think I saw a single centenarian that at the time of death did not have clinically elevated levels of LDL cholesterol. So it begs the question, is simply having high LDL cholesterol a marker for longevity, or is it a marker for cardiovascular disease that needs to be intervened with a chemical or a synthetic? And these corticosteroids that people are put on, very often they're anti-inflammatory in the beginning, but then they eat the joint like a termite. And so these were resulting in voluminous amounts of joint replacements so accurately that we were able to predict that the course of some of these medications would result in a joint replacement in roughly 6 years. And so we would artificially advance people's age 6 years, and we would actually schedule the joint replacement for them. And then we would reduce what's called their ambulatory profile, how well they ambulated, how well they moved. And as we reduced their mobility, we could bring in all of these diseases that exacerbated with reduced mobility. And in my mind, I'm just watching all this happen. I wanted to call these people and say, I'm not qualified to do that because I'm not licensed to practice medicine, but I wanted to call them and just say, Mrs. Jones, stop taking the corticosteroid, start supplementing with vitamin D3, get your B12 level to here. Let's fix your hormones because this is killing your red blood cell count and this is what's leading you to be so exhausted. And no one was looking at these basic nutrient deficiencies that we would see run in blood work that would cause all of these diseases to exacerbate, and people were succumbing much earlier to death or to the loss of their health span.
How many records do you think you saw in your time where you saw the full picture?
I would be working on 2 or 3 of these, 4 of these cases at a time. Some were shorter cases, some were longer cases, thousands. I mean, thousands. And in the tail end of my career, I started to manipulate the record artificially just to see what would happen to the life expectancy. I would never submit that as a report, but I would say, what if I fixed the anemia? What if I actually just corrected the D3 deficiency? What if, I was able to take out the pre-diabetic condition or reduce their hemoglobin A1C, and you would see the life expectancy jump, right? And so these are modifiable risk factors. And I think how many times, I would be reading a medical record and I go, well, I know what this is going to happen. This is just going to get worse because this patient has anemia. Like the classic treatment for some anemias is folic acid, B12, and iron. And they would give them folic acid, B12, and iron, and it wouldn't correct. And they give them folic acid, B12, and iron, they wouldn't correct. Folic acid, B12, and iron, wouldn't correct. And they wouldn't realize that that person can't process folic acid. If they gave him methylfolate, methylcobalamin, and iron bisglycinate, the anemia would correct.
But these are all sort of symptoms of further upstream issues, right? Mm-hmm. Like a decision that someone has made in their life typically, mm-hmm. that has caused them to develop these conditions which far down the stream, like the tree you talked about with the bad leaf. Doctors then point at the leaf and go, we need to fix the leaf. Mm-hmm. But it's down in the roots somewhere. Mm-hmm. So what are the societal and individual level things that we can be doing to prevent us even getting these chronic diseases? Like the simple things.
I'll tell you the simplest thing that we can do. First, we should think about having an invisible fence around us, right? Like a little force field. And we should filter things before they make it to the temple. Because either we can filter things for the temple or we can let the temple be the filter. So you can drink tap water. And if you drink tap water, your body will filter out the fluoride, the chlorine, the microplastics, the pharmaceuticals. Or you can filter your water before you drink it, right? And take one toxic load off your body. So what I would say is probably 5 things that I would commit to doing on a regular basis. Number 1 is upon waking, I would drink a mineralized water. I would take 10 ounces of water and I would add either a Celtic sea salt or a Baja Gold salt to my water. The reason for that is that most of us are deficient in some or several of the trace minerals in our body, the boring ones, boron, manganese, molybdenum, selenium, and stir it up and just whack it back. The second thing I would do is...
You're not talking about table salt here?
No, not sodium chloride. No, I'm talking about Baja Gold sea salt. That's probably the best salt that you can put in the human body because it has all 91 trace minerals. It's tested down to 250 parts per billion for microplastics and glyphosates. Only about 75% of that sodium crystal is actually sodium. The rest of them is all of these trace minerals. You can get very close to that with Celtic salt, right? And if you can't get Celtic salt, then you could move to a pink Himalayan sea salt. The problem with pink Himalayan sea salt recently is that a lot of it has heavy metals because it's coming out of China. So I would say the best salt is Baja Gold. A great salt is Celtic salt, and a decent salt is pink Himalayan sea salt. Forget table salt. I would just get that permanently out of your life.
Okay, so number one, I have my Baja.
Mineralize. And then number two, I would take a DHEA, EPA fish oil supplement or a fatty acid supplement with DHEA or EPA oil. An MCT oil. I would take a fatty acid oil in the morning.
An omega supplement.
An omega.
Omega-3.
An omega-3 supplement. And then I would develop a morning routine that included the basics from Mother Nature: sunlight, grounding, breath work, cold shower.
Okay, so I want to zoom in here on grounding.
Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of grounding.
My girlfriend grounds. And again, listen, my girlfriend's much smarter than I am, it transpires, because everything she says, I think I said this to you last time, everything she says to me, eventually I sit here with like a neuroscientist a year later and turns out she was absolutely right. And I thought she was a little bit cuckoo for thinking that getting outside in the morning and putting her feet on the ground were at all beneficial. But I've been told time and time again it is. What is grounding and why does it help?
So we get three things from Mother Nature, right? We get magnetism from the earth, we get oxygen from the air, we get light from the sun. The further we get away from those things, the sicker we become.
Really?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
The magnetism piece, it sounds like spiritual cuckoo stuff.
I mean, probably 10,000 years ago, they probably thought the same thing about gravity, but the earth has a low Gauss current, right? I mean, we were meant to spend 85% of our time outside. We spend 97% of our time indoors now. The truth is, most of us are not getting enough sun. We're not getting too much sun. We're not getting enough sun. And, because of the way we eat and seed oils and everything that are oxidizing in our skin, our cancer rates are exploding, but not because of our sun exposure. It's because of our diet. And we can talk about that later. But when you touch the surface of the earth, when bare feet touch bare soil, grass, sand, we discharge into the earth. And by that, I mean you actually change the polarity in the body. And this is measurable. In fact, if you want to do a little experiment, find somebody that has a microscope, a basic microscope, and get a slide, and just take a prick your finger and take a drop of your blood and put it on that slide, smear it around, and look at it under the microscope. I think I have a video of this on my Instagram. And what you'll see when you look at your blood in real time is you'll see most of your red blood cells are stuck together and clumped up. Not clotted, but they're attracted to each other. Because when cells have the same charge, they repel. When they repel, it increases the amount of surface area that cell has to contact the outside environment. So now it can exchange waste, it can eliminate waste, detoxify, repair, can regenerate. So imagine that you have bloodstream full of red blood cells and they start to get opposite charges. So they attract. And when they attract, they touch. And everywhere that they touch, that cell loses surface area to exchange with the outside environment. When you touch the surface of the earth for a few minutes, you will repolarize those. Prick your finger 10 minutes after you come inside, put it back on that same slide, look at your blood. It's going to look like eggs slithering around in a bowl of oil. They will bump into each other and they'll be sliding around, but they will not be clumped together and stuck.
So what's going on then? It must be coming through my feet? The charge coming through my feet?
Yeah, so you're actually discharging into the earth. You're exchanging ions. It's a low Gauss current. So like a magnet, you're exchanging ions with the earth and you're discharging. You're grounding.
What if I live on the ground floor? Do I still have to go outside?
Yes, you got to touch bare dirt, soil, grass, sand.
Why can't I, if I live on the ground floor, why doesn't the floor in the lower floor of the house?
Because that insulates you from the Earth's magnetic field. There's usually steel, concrete, wood. There's other barriers, tile, asphalt. There are things that actually prevent you from actually contacting the surface of the Earth. You know, there are grounding mattresses that you plug into the ground wire, and then that ground wire, if you look at how, you know, the grounding a circuit occurs, at some point is running directly into the ground. There will be a pole in the ground that is connected, usually by copper, to that wire and connected to your outlet to ground that outlet.
Can't I just get some kind of mat that has the same charge?
You could get a PEMF mat. But again, you know, one of the things I get a lot of flack of is saying that you have to buy all of this expensive equipment. So there's two ways to do it. You can buy a pulse electromagnetic field mat, a PEMF mat. I have one. They cost about $5,000. So if you got $5,000 lying around, it's one of the best investments you can make. You put it in your bed, you go to sleep on it, you run a low Gauss current at night. It will help get you into a deep sleep. You'll wake up alkaline every morning. It will push the electrosmog right out of your body, because PEMF gets rid of electrosmog, 5G, Wi-Fi.
When you say you wake up alkaline every morning?
So when you change the pH of the blood is a pretty narrow range. It's about 0.5 of a point. It's about half a point. And it's a complete fallacy that you can change the pH of the blood by drinking alkaline water. Alkaline water will not actually change the pH of your blood. If you want to change the pH of your blood, amongst other things, you apply a low Gauss current. pH stands for potential hydrogen. It's a charge. And so by running a low Gauss current through the body or touching the surface of the Earth, you actually can move the pH of the blood slightly.
And that does?
An alkaline state is a disease-free state. The more acidic we get, the sicker we become. And so if we want to move the pH of the blood slightly, if we want to wake up alkaline, if we want to run a low Gauss current through our body, we can either touch the surface of the Earth or buy a PEMF mat.
So they've done tests where someone lays on a PEMF mat for a certain amount of time. They then do a blood test and they find that their blood is more alkaline.
Yes. Yes, and that separation of blood cells you can see instantly getting off of a PEMF mat. Again, I've got videos of me doing this to my production manager in my house, breaking his finger, putting it on a slide, putting on the PEMF and actually looking at it afterwards. The second thing I would do is I would learn to do breath work. I use something called a Hypermax, which is based on Dr. Van Arden and Dr. Otto Warburg's Nobel Prize winning work, and that is it's called multi-step oxygen therapy, where you actually take an oxygen concentrator, you fill up a bag full of 900 liters of 95% O2, and you actually just breathe that 95% O2 for 10 to 12 minutes while you're active on a treadmill. But if you don't want to have an EWAT, exercise with oxygen therapy machine, you can learn to do breath work, engage the auxiliary muscles of respiration, get oxygen down into the lobes of your lungs and out of the apex of your lungs. One of the articles that I quoted that turned out not to be a study, and I still can't find the reference for it, was that after age 35, 90% of people will never sprint again. And again, I haven't been able to find if that came from a clinical study or if it was an article, but whether or not that's true, the vast majority of people stop engaging their auxiliary muscles of respiration. Really exercising our diaphragm, using the intercostal muscles between our ribs, pushing air down into lobes of our body. And as our posture collapses and our CO2 rises, if you think about the expired air in your body from the tip of your nose and the tip of your mouth, all the way down your esophagus, out your bronchioles, into the farthest reaches of your lungs, that's all expired air. Until you get the oxygen all the way down and out to the edges of the lung, you're not getting oxygen into the bloodstream. So as we age and our posture collapses, our respiratory rate gets more and more shallow. We're essentially hyperventilating carbon dioxide, right? And which is accelerating aging. I mean, aging is, the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. And so by just learning how to do breath work, so one, I would ground. Two, I would learn to do breath work. I do a Wim Hof style of breath work. I do 3 rounds of 30 breaths with an extended breath hold every single morning. It is the one thing that I never, ever, ever, ever miss.
Why?
Ever. Because I make little promises to myself and I try to keep them. And I find that I lose confidence in myself when I consistently break really small promises to myself. And I think a lot of people do this. And our bodies crave consistency. And so
you lose confidence in yourself.
you say, I'm going to go to bed at, 10:30 tonight, and you go to bed at 1 a.m., and then you say, I'm going to work out and first thing in the morning, and you actually don't work out. Or you get up in the morning and you say, I listened to that podcast, I'm going to do what Gary said, I'm going to ground and get some sunlight, and I'm going to do some breath work, and then you actually don't do it. So the little internal promises that you make to yourself. And I feel like a lot of people break these little promises to themselves. They're not making them to their spouse or to their kids or to their partners, or, they're not the big promises that everybody knows about. And I think it nibbles away at our self-confidence and our own ability to trust ourselves. And so I have a morning routine. I'm very consistent with it. But the one thing that is portable for me is the ability to get outside and ground and do breath work. And I never, ever, ever miss. I can't even tell you how many years I've gone without missing a single morning of breath work. The other thing that it does for me, because, human beings crave consistency. So if within 30 minutes of waking every day, no matter what time zone you're in, you're doing 3 rounds of 30 breaths, your body begins to zero in on that, and it begins to understand that that's the morning. And this is go time. And so simple to do. When I'm here, I wake up, I might be at a different time because I'm usually on the East Coast, so I wake up earlier here, but I open the door, I go out on the balcony, I sit on the chair, it's nice and cool outside, I face the sun, and I do 3 rounds of 30 breaths every single day.
My partner brought me one of those big red light panels for Christmas. It was my Christmas present. And funnily enough, guess what my Christmas present to her was as well? The fucking
red light.
Yeah.
You get a bed, or did you get the panels?
The panels. It was
Would
so
you
funny.
get like Juve XO, or what?
I have no idea.
What'd you get? Okay.
I have no idea the brand. But she brought me one. It's like a small one. And then I was like, babe, open your present. And then she opened hers, and hers was like a big one. She's like literally half the size of me. So we swapped. But we now both use it. It's a bit of a routine in the morning. We both wake up.
Amazing.
We go and sit down by it. And I'm not really sure what it's doing. I've just heard a lot of positive things. I've done a little bit of my own research on it and how to use it to make sure I'm not like killing myself somehow. But what is it doing, and why should everyone consider getting one? So
it's referred to in the literature as photobiomodulation. Photobiomodulation. So if you want to look up any of the clinical studies, put photobiomodulation and then put and dementia and Alzheimer's and skin and inflammation, and the studies will come up. But basically, different nanometers of light have different effects in the body. And so they are well researched and publicized to reduce inflammation, increase microvascular circulation, so the smallest of the capillaries in our body are affected by light. They have a very specific effect in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. So if you actually went through the wall of a cell and into the cytoplasm and found the mitochondria, and you went into the mitochondria, you'd see that there's a motor in there that's spinning around. It's called the Krebs cycle. And this motor, when it spits out energy called ATP, essentially it has 2 choices every time it makes a revolution, right? It can either create 2 units of energy, or it creates 36 units of energy. It's either 16 times more efficient or 16 times less efficient. And what determines that is whether or not oxygen enters that cycle. So one of the things that red light does is it goes through the wall of the mitochondria and it kicks out a gas called mitochondrial nitric oxide and forces oxygen to dock. So when you get into a red light therapy bed or use red light therapy panels, one of the things that's happening is you're essentially forcing oxygen into the mitochondria. You're forcing the oxygen to use mitochondria and release a gas called mitochondrial nitric oxide. This is also measurable, by the way. You can get saliva nitric oxide strips. You could put it in your mouth, and before you got in a red light therapy bed, you could look at the saliva, the amount of nitric oxide in your saliva, and you'd see it's like a pale kind of yellowish pink. Then you get in one of those red light therapy beds for 20 minutes, and about 10 minutes after you get out, test it again, you'll see that your nitric oxide levels are through the roof. That's a positive sign that the mitochondria has thrown this gas out and brought oxygen in. And it's to imagine what happens in a cell when you give it 16 times the amount of energy. So imagine upstaging trillions of cells to allow them to eliminate waste, repair, detoxify, regenerate, just by using light. It also has a very positive effect on collagen, elastin, fibrin. It's known to improve angiogenesis, the new blood vessel formation. I was on the Joe Rogan's podcast a few months ago, and he ended up buying one of these red light beds from me, and we installed it in his house. And he told me about 4 or 5 weeks ago that he's no longer wearing readers anymore. Like his eyesight has improved that much. And he said he's starting to really notice the changes in his skin. So photobiomodulation is very real and it absolutely works. But, without people having to think that they have to spend that kind of money on a red light therapy bed, you can also just expose your skin to sunlight, especially during first light, the first 45 minutes of the day, when there's no UVA, there's no UVB, there's high amounts of healthy blue light. You can still generate vitamin D3.
Let me just run that back so I'm clear. On the point about Rogan's eyesight, I was looking through some research about the impact of red light on eyesight, and it said that it's good for eyesight. And so,
incredibly good for eyesight.
Because I was wondering whether I should be looking at this thing while it's on.
Yes.
And then I went online, Googled it, had a rummage around, and it said you can look at it, you can stare at it.
You can.
Yeah.
You can. Because remember, there's no UVA, there's no UVB, and some of the marginal information that comes out about red light being damaging to you, you have to remember that red light is a spectrum. Infrared, for example, is a spectrum. Most red light therapy beds run from 600 nanometers to about 1,000 nanometers wavelength of light. As you get above that, you're in the infrared spectrum, but you're going all the way to 1,100, maybe even above. So in other words, when you say infrared light, this is a non-visible spectrum of light. But there's a broad number of wavelengths, right? So an infrared red light bed will have infrared light, but it will be very low in the spectrum, so it doesn't create heat. It doesn't excite a chromophore that creates vibration and makes you sweat. When you get an infrared sauna, you're getting very high into those wavelengths. You're exciting a different chromophore in the body, and your water to be specific, and it vibrates and creates heat, and you start to sweat. So you don't sweat in a red light therapy bed, even though it's infrared, low in the spectrum, but you do sweat in an infrared sauna, even though it's infrared light, it's high in the spectrum. So the infrared light and the red light that comes from red light beds and red light panels and face masks is incredibly beneficial for you. I mean, I would be scared to even tell you all the positive outcomes that we see in people that regularly use red light therapy, because you can't really make medical claims around them, but I can tell you firsthand that we have seen just astounding things that people would probably consider miracles with red light therapy.
You mentioned the first 45 minutes of sunlight.
First light.
Because I always try and figure out the sort of evolutionary backstory to red light and where it came from in nature and why it was good for us as humans and why we've lost it. Those are the three sort of questions.
Well, we're really photovoltaic beings. I mean, we're very tied to the circadian cycle of the sun. I mean, light causes the body to behave in very special ways. I mean, you probably heard that getting first light can actually reset your circadian cycle and do more for you to sleep that night than probably just about any other sleep habit. So your sleep routine really starts with your morning routine. And it has an effect on cortisol receptors. It has effect on dopamine, on melatonin receptors. Remember, cortisol is a hormone that responds to light, right? I mean, when our eyes are closed and light is passing through our eyelids, it has a tendency to raise our cortisol levels, which is why they tell you not to use blue light at night, right? You're stimulating cortisol and you're stimulating a waking hormone when you actually are trying to go to sleep. So by getting first light, you're telling the body that it's morning. You're raising cortisol, you're downregulating your melatonin receptors, you're getting healthy blue light into your eyes, you're getting healthy light onto your skin. There's no UVA, there's no UVB, none of the damaging rays of the sun. And in 15 or 20 minutes, if you stack them all together, you can do breath work and get sunlight. Just try it for 7 days.
What if I have the red light at nighttime? Is that going to trick my body into thinking it's the morning?
No. The red light won't do that. It's completely different. It's not the blue light spectrum that we're talking about.
So I can have red light any time of day?
You can have red light anytime. In fact, red light, I find it very relaxing. I sometimes will do my red light bed right before bed. Sleep like a baby.
We've been doing that as well at home, so I was just checking. Because
awesome.
I did Google to see if it was something that would wake me up, but no, you're right. Blue light is the thing that wakes us. Bit of a tangent, but I just saw you have a gulp of that water. Mm-hmm. What is in that water?
Hydrogen water. Why
hydrogen water?
This is a little hydrogen generator. Again, I don't know if you can still see that, but there's what it's doing. There's a little
pick it up and you'll be able to see it in the camera.
Yeah, a little electrolysis pump down there, and it's basically adding hydrogen gas to the water. There's not much left in there, but if you fill it with water, you can see that. I mean, it is fascinating. I am so convinced that hydrogen water is the best water that you can put in the human body. And there's a website called hydrogenstudies.com that has about 1,350 studies on the site. You can go to hydrogenstudies.com. When you get to that site, you can actually search by human clinical trials or animal clinical trials. So you could sort out and look at human clinical trials and look at all of the ways that hydrogen gas is used in therapeutic treatments, reducing inflammation, improving the absorption of supplements, improving athletic performance, delaying addressing delayed onset muscle soreness, and reducing neural inflammation. I mean, there are so many clinical trials proving the efficacy of hydrogen gas in the body. And people do hydrogen gas through a nasal cannulus, through ear cannulus, through eye cannuluses. You can breathe hydrogen gas. But by drinking hydrogen water, you have a very positive effect on inflammation in the body.
When you pump that hydrogen into that, doesn't it just come out the top?
No, it's sealed. So it's under pressure. So what it does is it forces the gas back into the liquid.
Okay.
And so the liquid actually has a high part per million concentration of hydrogen gas. The colder the liquid, the more gas you can dissolve. So it takes about 5 hours for it to dissipate from that. Some people use hydrogen H2 tablets. I just use this hydrogen bottle and I take it literally everywhere I go. I notice when I don't have it.